We are hardwired with this Stone Age brain to survive. We would either fight, we would flight, we would freeze, or we would fawn. Well, Laura, welcome back.
Thanks for having me again.
How was the first episode for you, walking through that?
Yeah, I felt so comfortable, and you do such a great job of just making it just a vulnerable and authentic space. So that was right up my alley. And I feel like, I hope that the conversation kind of continues from that place of just vulnerability and authenticity, and I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I think you're going to get poked a little bit about that today.
Yeah.
I don't have Mary here to poke me or poke back, so you're the Pokemon
okay.
today, okay?
Yeah.
Well, we're thrilled to have you, and I learned so much last time having you. Even though I've known you for quite a while, it was great to hear some of your story and some of the places that you're in right now in life. And so welcome back, viewers, as we dip our toes into Chapter 1, which is called the Stone Age Brain. And if you have little children in your home, listeners, you will get the Stone Age Brain because you are literally right in the middle of the dinosaur era.
Yeah.
Do you want to hear a joke about the dinosaurs?
Absolutely.
Okay. So why can't you hear a pterodactyl pee?
Oh, I don't know.
Because the P is silent. Sorry, just had to do it.
That's a great one.
Had to do it.
My 7-year-old's going to love that one.
This is the land I live in right now, so it's good. So I love the title of this book because this idea of the Stone Age brain, because I think we feel like we've really evolved since this space, right? Like they were so evolved. And yet we are hardwired with this Stone Age brain to survive. In the Stone Age, you were either looking for dinner or you were dinner.
Yeah.
So you were kind of always on high alert, right? And you had some responses, and we will know those responses right now. We would either fight, we would flight, we would freeze, or we would fawn. And I've got a funny story for you, Laura, that I think you'll appreciate. Laura and I have a mutual connection with Tobermory area in Ontario because Laura's parents live up that way, and I've been cottaging up that way for many years. So up there in September, and I wanted to do a section of the Bruce Trail with my dog, and I knew it was a very technical area of the Bruce Trail, but I also knew that there was a black bear in the area because there had been black bear sightings, which is not unusual. But I'd forgotten my bear bells. And so here I am thinking, reading all the material about all the things that you should do if you see a black bear, right? Because I can never remember. Do I fight? Do I flight? Do I freeze? Do I play dead? Like, what do I do? I ended up getting a soup can, dumping out the contents, taking the lid off, putting rocks inside, and then taping up the open end. And as we were walking, shaking this as a message to any black bears in the area. We're here, we're on your trail. Don't worry, just go away.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I did not see a black bear, but I felt prepared. So in your experience, my go-to in the 4 F's of survival is fight. What do you think is your go-to response?
Yeah, so I think I am somewhere, I think freeze and fawn are both really common for me. And freeze was one that I was aware of for a long time. But fawn was relatively new for me the last few years. And it was only when it was after Christmas and we were leading up to Lent, and I was having a conversation with a very good friend of mine about, what were we going to give up for Lent this year? And I said to her, I'm going to give up flattery for Lent. And she looked at me and very honestly said, can you just give that up entirely? Like, not just for 40 days, forever. And I was struck, like, what do you mean? Like, doesn't everyone need isn't flattery normal? Doesn't everyone need flattery? She was like, absolutely not. That's not something you have to use. And so we had this conversation, and I went on to process over the last few years about, oh, it's true. I see it everywhere now. And so this idea of fawning, and flattery is a way that I fawn. In conflict, when it's one-on-one with somebody and they're looking for a response and I don't know how to respond,
right,
or I am feeling big uncomfortable feelings, I will shut them down, and I will flatter, and I will appease and say whatever it is in a positive way that will kind of diffuse the situation, but not just diffuse, just kind of create distance maybe out of the discomfort. And so it's still something that I'm trying not to do as I kind of connect with my emotions more and I'm more present. And like we talked about last episode, being more able to speak in the moment. This is an inauthentic way that I've been speaking in the moment instead of an authentic way.
So for you, the fawn response is to get any kind of focus off of you.
Yeah, redirect.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I know that you have this dog who is a rescue from Texas.
Yeah.
And I imagine that part of this dog's response is like, don't notice me.
Yeah.
I'm not here.
Yeah. He'll hide. He hides under anything he can. And I see that with myself too. This is a way of kind of hiding and deflecting and making sure all of the attention, all of the positive attention is somewhere else, but not here.
And, I think for some of our listeners, that might be a whole new thing. Like as putting flattery in the context of a survival, self-preservation context. Mm-hmm. Because I wouldn't have necessarily put that in that category.
Yeah.
But the fawn response is the response to appease and just like, put the attention off of you. And it shows up in a whole lot of ways, right? And for you, that's the way it shows up.
Yeah. And then the freeze one too is a big one for me. But I think is when I have the space where there's not a response being sought from me.
Right.
And so sometimes it'll happen when I'm on looking on someone else's situation and I walk away feeling like, oh, I should have spoken up for that person, or happens with my kids often actually.
Yeah.
Where there's an intense situation and I feel like, oh, I should have stood up for them in the moment. I should have said something, but I can't for some reason. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And for me, my fight response is quite strong.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting for me as I've understood why I do that. Mm-hmm. And I think for me is that I'll hurt first before you can hurt me, which is a horrible way to go through life. But it's been a way of, on the Enneagram 8, the image is a marshmallow heart in a barbed wire cage, right?
Yeah.
So the prickliness of the cage around this marshmallow heart, because I'm a total softy inside. So if you're going to hurt me, then I'm going to hurt you first. Or I'm going to fight against that first so that you can't get to me in that little marshmallow heart of mine. So we all have this fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. And sometimes we can exhibit more than one.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
With you, it's the freeze and the fawn. And there have been times where my flight instinct kicks in really strongly. And I just want to get out of the situation, away from it. And maybe sometimes it's because I feel like my fight response is going to be too big. And so in order to preserve the relationship, I just want to get out of there.
Yeah.
And it actually happened to me a while back where a good friend of mine said something to me that was actually quite hurtful. And I was ready to pack my bag and get out.
Yeah.
And just start the car, go.
Yeah.
Which was a very foreign kind of response for me. So can you maybe, Laura, talk to us about why Mary felt it was so important to put this particular chapter in the book What prompted her to write this chapter?
Yeah, so Mary shared in the book this experience that she had with a close friend who had said something that was racist and hurtful to her, and elicited this very strong emotional and psychological response in Mary that she was aware in the moment even was touching on historical trauma and historical situations and feelings of feeling other and feeling different. And it sounded like, as Mary describes it as well, she knew that it was over the top. She knew that it was outsized to the situation, and that she had the understanding to know that this was all kind of stuff that she was taking responsibility for, that even though the friend had hurt and said this thing that had touched on all of this, but this was signaling some work that she needed to do, but that she also felt like you were just talking about, this concept of, oh, okay, now this relationship is over, we're done, some of those things. Yeah. And so this like push and pull of being kind of taken over by these feelings and these emotions, even when her rational mind knew that it was kind of not real or not the actual situation.
So for me, what I'm hearing, and this happened to you too, is when your friend called you out with the flattery. Yeah. Right? It was like you weren't even realizing how prevalent and predominant it was in your life as kind of the survival method that you were using, until you became conscious of it and aware of it. And then what happens is you become like super conscious of it.
Yeah. It just shows up everywhere now. And so and I think that was what I saw in Mary's story too, is that there is this trigger event that happens, and all of a sudden we have a new lens to see conflict that's happened in our life, some of the relationships that we have. I'm sure even as I mentioned this fawning flattery, I'm conscious that I'm like, oh no, Gillian, I hope that you're not aware that I've, the times that I've done this possibly to you. And so it does give us a new lens for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we can relate to Mary's experience because whether it has been a cultural backlash, a racist backlash, a gender backlash that has caused us to go into these survival, and remember, they are survival techniques. That's why this chapter is called The Stone Age Brain, because these were techniques that we developed in order to survive. Yeah. And now they are more self-preservation. Yeah. Whether it's self-preservation about our reputation or about our place in society or about being hurt or being ridiculed, whether it's our reputation, we all have these survival responses, right? Yeah. And the human instinct to survive is one of the strongest and most powerful instincts. And our beautiful and our complex brain is always kind of filtering everything through our experiences in order to protect us. And I even see it, living with a little guy, and you would see it with your children, is sometimes the way they behave is because they're just trying to preserve themselves. Yeah. And we as adults might interpret it differently, right? Like, my little grandson had a big meltdown the other day, and I was thinking, where is this coming from? And then I realized probably something that's happened at school, and he hasn't been able to deal with his emotions about it there. And now he's got a safe place, so I'll let it go. But there's something behind this that's just not normal. Like there's something that's happened that's triggered this response. Yeah. And then, Mary talks about how all of our emotions are filtered through the brain and go through the amygdala, which is the emotional part of the brain that reacts very, very quickly. And it responds to these hot emotions like disgust or anger or fear. And we just can't help ourselves. Like when we see any of those or experience them, they are hot emotions. And what happens is we can respond so quickly that we can do a lot of damage. Yeah. Right? And I know that to be true in my case. But then these cool emotions like joy and compassion and love, they take longer because back in the Stone Age, there wasn't a pressing need for those to get to the surface really quickly.
Yeah, yeah. And so they end up taking this backseat to our hot emotions, which I just, it's just so true. And when our hot emotions are triggered, they can hijack, like Mary talked about in her experience, they can hijack everything else and cause us to cause damage to ourselves or others or other relationships that we have, because we have these really impulsive responses out of our hot emotions.
Yeah.
It's interesting, even as somebody who doesn't identify with fight, that this still comes up for me.
Yes.
Even though fight wouldn't be my go-to response, it's still present. These things are still happening behind the surface. It's just that they might be internal. It's not external. And then Mary says that sometimes the hot emotions, if they're left unchecked, can keep us in unhealthy patterns. And that for those of us who are wired to fight, like we were talking about, and get quite upset with ourselves, because we can get upset with ourselves because we kind of go quickly into anger, and it can keep us stuck in patterns that are really unhealthy. And you've talked a little bit about that. And like I said, it might not be external for me, but it's happening internally for me and setting up unhealthy patterns for me too, even though it's not out of a fight response.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we were talking about on the way in the car, we were talking about this kind of response. And when I coach people, particularly 9s and 1s on the Enneagram, they will deny that they have anger. Like, oh, really?
Yeah.
They will deny anger because they don't want to be seen as angry people.
Yeah.
And their anger is typically internalized.
Yes. Yes.
Right? Rather than take the chaos out and the anger out, it's brought inside.
Yeah.
And of course, that doesn't work very well for anybody, right? Yeah. We bottle everything up. The other thing for me, too, is that there's a lot of shame involved when these hot emotions come to the surface. And people will say, why do I respond like this? Or why am I always so angry? Or why do I, get so impulsive with these things? And there's a ton of shame. And I think that for a lot of us, the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn does create shame for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's not the way we want to behave and show our emotions in the world.
Yeah.
And especially you were talking about, with your children, why didn't I speak up about that situation?
Yeah. Oh, it's huge. And I can see like some of these patterns that I practice now in my responses are things that that my parents modeled for me growing up too. And even though I know what it felt like for a parent to not speak up for me when I was a kid, I'm still kind of perpetuating some of those unhealthy things. And so then that doubles on the shame because it makes me feel like, oh, I should know better. I know what it feels like to not be defended or to not have someone fight for me in the moment. And I still am not able to do it. And so that shame piece is so, so huge, I think, as mothers especially, but as parents.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. And we'll get to the shame chapter in a little bit, but it does play out in our survival instincts. There's no doubt about that. So we are wired for 3 different basic instincts, and the Enneagram describes this pretty beautifully. So we often use that model to describe the 3 instincts. Yeah. So instinct number 1 is self-preservation, and we all understand that. The need for food, the need for safety, the need for shelter, the more complex needs like psychological safety, health and well-being, and the desire for comfort and pleasure, kind of that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah. We can see that in our mind. So we're all kind of wired for that. And then the second one is this instinct for connection and intimacy. This would include attachment to others. And, we have already done a previous episode on attachment theory and nature versus nurture, which we'll talk about later. And we've been designed to have these relationships with each other and with God's creation. And it's interesting to me because I have a friend who would say that she feels most connected in nature. Yeah. Whereas she may struggle with intimate relationships with other human beings, but you put her in a forest and she comes alive.
Yeah.
So that instinct is there for that need for intimacy with creation. And then instinct number 3 is the need to align with others or belong with others.
Yeah.
And remember, in survival times when, you were out hunting with the hunters, there was safety in numbers.
Yeah.
Right? And you would want to align with the expert hunter because that would mean dinner. And how it's been interpreted now in our context is we tend to align with people in power. People who can help us get our needs met.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's pretty icky.
Yeah.
Because we can end up using people or being used in order for someone else's self-preservation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's like the shame piece as well. That sometimes on my journey, as I've looked back and I can pick up on, times where that's exactly what I've done, where I've aligned with a person or sometimes even not just a person, a thing or a cause or something, because and I don't think that I was conscious of it in the moment even necessarily. But looking back, I can tell that was this need and of kind of belonging and kind of being alongside other people or a cause or something that was going somewhere.
Yes.
And that there was safety in numbers, like you talked about, and that I was a part of something was so strong that I didn't really care about some of the probably negative things that were there, like my personal motivations, but maybe other negative things. And so there's been shame that I've had to work out looking back on my life on those times.
Yeah. And the interesting thing to me, Laura, that you talked about the fawn instinct, the preservation of fawn. Sometimes we can stay in a group, like you said, or a community or an environment where we play down the toxic aspects of it because it gives us a place to belong.
Yeah.
It meets that third instinct.
Yeah.
And we can overlook things. We can dismiss them. And then, as we get healthier, sometimes we go, oh boy, this might be a place of belonging, but it's not a safe place of belonging for me.
Yeah. And I think it's huge in our context right now, as we talk about like in faith circles with some of the conversations around unlearning faith and some other things that are deconstructing and some other kind of buzzwords that are happening, because I think that it is hard. It's scary to think of leaving a context where you once found safety and found belonging and to risk being on your own. And when we think about it in this context of kind of our survival brains, it makes sense. Of course, we're scared of being on our own and what could happen outside of this safety net that we had in a community or in a place or with a person that we had aligned ourselves with. But I think that is good and necessary work that has to happen. And that's been a big part of my healing journey too.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And I think there'll be a lot of people that will resonate with that with you, Laura, for sure. So as we are fleshing this out a little bit, let's take a look at the nuts and bolts. All right. So Mary walks us through some of the ways that this shows up. So we give much greater weight and attention to negative information.
Yeah.
And we had to back in our Stone Age brains, right? If there were threats, we had to pay attention to the negative because that could be the way we survived.
Yeah.
So our brains are wired to focus on the negative because if there was a threat, we needed to be really aware of it.
Yeah.
What else do we do?
Yeah. So we're really protective of our stuff, especially when we're threatened. So if we have little, then maybe we're even more protective of that little that we have. And if we have a lot, we may prize that comfort and prioritize it and fight really hard if it's threatened.
Oh, yeah. We see this with the NIMBYs, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Not in my backyard. Yeah. And we really don't like change, and we prefer the status quo, even if it's dysfunctional, which we just talked about, over risky change with no guarantee of success.
Yeah.
So if I leave this group that I belong to, and I've had maybe some status in, what is it going to look for me if I leave this group, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes that plays into it.
This one is something that this next one that Mary talks about is something that I'm still kind of sitting in and wrestling with. It was a big light bulb moment for me. Mary says we automatically classify others as friend or foe. So this can lead to stereotyping, obviously, but can also help us to decipher untrustworthy individuals. And I'm really sitting in that one. That's a new lens, like I was talking about before, this new lens for me to look back on some of my motivations and some of the things that I've done in my life, to look at them a little bit more honestly, I think.
That's interesting. Can you expand a little bit?
Yeah.
Or you feel free to expand a little bit?
Yeah, I think that as somebody who, one of my highest values is compassion, and always, and this is something that I've had to kind of unlearn and relearn in a healthier way, definitely. But this idea of always putting other people before yourself. So this idea, I think that I have conditioned myself as well as been conditioned to look at everyone as friend. I have I'm very trustworthy, and it's something that with boundaries and with maturity and age that I've had to learn, actually, that's not an honest way of going through life, that there is a need to look and classify people as foe. And so, I'm still sitting in that a little bit, but it's been helpful for me to look back and realize, it would have been healthy for me to take a second and assess that person and decide whether or not they were friend or foe. That is just kind of hardwiring and normal to do.
Yeah. And you see, for me, I'm on the opposite side of the spectrum, which is the way we're wired, right? So for me, you kind of have to prove to me that you're a friend. And I don't automatically put people in the faux camp. It's not quite as crystal clear as that. But there's this period of trust that needs to be developed before I'm trusting. Yeah. And that can be good and bad, right? There are good and bad things to both sides of it, because sometimes I'm not giving people the benefit of the doubt. But it is wired into us as a survival instinct. So if you're like Laura or you're like me and you are worried about, just being accepting of everybody as friends, and then you've been burned a few times or been taken advantage of, that's okay, because your survival instinct was playing into that. And the more you become aware of your choices, the more you can do things about them. And then I love this one. We barter information like gossip and manage relationships for our benefit. Remember, aligning with the right people may help us survive. Yeah. So this reminds me of all those crazy shows like Survivor and stuff like that, where people make alliances and there's all this gossip about other people. And it is one of those most basic survival instincts that if I can get you in my camp not liking that person, it may mean more meat at the end of the day for me and my supper. Yeah. Right?
I have to tell you, we just started we watch competition. My family is very competitive. And so we watch competition shows together often. It's usually baking or something else. We just started watching Survivor for the first time within the last couple of weeks even. And it is shocking to me at how quickly my kids are so invested. And it's because I can see it. My kids understand the social bartering. So it is just so hardwired. They get it. This is like the schoolyard to them.
Yes,
they're they know it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it starts early, doesn't it? Yeah.
So the next one, you kind of mentioned it, Gillian, but was we learn to be friendly and empathize with others to build peaceful social alliances. And I feel like that's my MO. I could talk to you, I could coach you on how to do that in the world. And thankfully, that is something that I am aware of, and I can kind of unlearn and relearn and all of the things we're talking about. But it was reassuring just to see it on the list and know, you know what, this is just a basic kind of hardwired thing.
Yes, it gives us a lot of grace and self-compassion for ourselves when we see these things fleshed out like this.
Yeah.
And if you need coaching in this area, go see Laura. And then we gain status by beating our chests more loudly, right? Status is very important and plays out in a variety of ways. And right now in our culture, status is about social media platforms, shares of reels, going viral, having a presence. That's how we beat our chests. Yeah. But I imagine back in the Stone Age, the loudest and brawniest were the ones that got a lot of status, right? Yeah. We wanted to hang out with those guys.
Yeah. So
I can see how these instincts have certainly played out in my life, and I'm glad that you can see yourself in these stories, Laura. We have a few minutes to wrap up some of the questions that are in the book.
Yeah.
And for those of you that have the book, I would really encourage you to dig deep into the questions. I'm just going to pick one question for you, Laura, and that we can camp on. So, can you think of a recent time where you felt hijacked by a strong emotional response?
Yeah.
Did you fight, flight, freeze, or fawn?
Yeah. So I actually, because of some of the unlearning that I've been doing, I've gotten to a place where in relationships where I feel secure that I can kind of speak up in the moment. And I found that now that I have kind of that healthy spot, that the fight response is there, and that the emotions are very overwhelming and very intense. And so just this weekend, I was traveling last week, and so I came home and was jet lagged and tired, and so I had some of those I was hungry, I'm sure, lots of things happening, and something happened at home, and I was very able to respond in the moment in that situation, and raised my voice, and my emotions were very big, and my body language got very big, and it's still not comfortable for me at all in that moment. And so it was helpful for me to say and to articulate it out loud. I was able to say, I'm really uncomfortable right now. My emotions are feeling really big, and I can hear that, I'm getting loud and all of those things. But it still felt, you kind of come out of it and feel like a little bit of a hangover almost, like feeling the shame and the guilt and some of those things. And so I'm still working through it, but it really was this it kind of just took over my body. And I think that that's probably why I am so, the fight is probably so scary for me.
Yes, it is.
Because it feels so out of control.
And it feels so foreign to your normal way of going about in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier, so this is the one I would choose. So a friend said something to me that was very hurtful, and instead of my fight response kicking in, I wanted to grab my bag, get in my car, and leave.
Yeah.
So that was my flight response. And it was such a foreign feeling to me.
Yeah.
And I actually had to remove myself a little bit, go to another room, kind of talk myself down, and then come back. Yeah. But everything in me wanted to just get out, get away. Yeah. And it was such a weird response for me. I'm thinking, okay. And it took me quite a while to unpack that, why it was like that. So, we do have these different responses, and they can feel very scary and very foreign to us.
Yeah.
So that kind of wraps up. That was a big one, wasn't it, Laura?
That was. Yeah. I'm feeling a little poked.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah, I know. So I'm glad. Yeah. But do you feel safely poked?
Yes.
Okay.
Very, very safely poked.
Good. Okay. So thank you, listeners, for hanging in with us today about our Stone Age brains. And maybe something has really tweaked with you about how you react. And remember to be really gentle with yourself and tender with yourself, because these are hardwired responses that, as Laura has mentioned, come generationally to us, as well as they're just there. And remember, those hot emotions go right to the amygdala and can act really quick because they were wired for our immediate survival. And those cold emotions like love and joy and compassion, they could go on the back burner a little bit just because We didn't need them to survive right away. So if you're struggling with those hot emotions, give yourself a lot of grace, a lot of compassion, and learn some of the strategies in order to move to those cooler emotions that will help to soothe you. So thanks for hanging in. We are not going to delve into chapter number 2 because it's on the nature versus nurture. And we did a previous podcast episode. We will put the link to it in the show notes so that you can go back. It's about attachment theory and different things. And it's a big chapter. So that's why we decided to leave this one so that you can go back and just check out that podcast episode. And until next time, have a great week and thank you for joining us. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Fully Lived Life podcast. We hope you found it encouraging and helpful. Be sure to follow or subscribe so that you never miss a new episode. And if you enjoyed our show, please help spread the word by sharing with your friends and family and posting on your social media. Thanks for listening and tune in to our next episode.